Hello everybody! So nice to see you back around these parts. It's been a little bit since we last had a conversation, you and me, mano y mano, and I want to just say thanks for being patient and waiting for me to get back from my little vacation and have a little bit of a rest, because it was very much needed. Today is going to be a pretty fun episode where I guess kind of peel back the curtain that is how I do the things that I do. In particular, today I want to go through with you my Visual Studio Code setup and all of the extensions that I use. I've gotten these questions in the past before. What do you use when you're actually making these tutorials? Like, what are these fancy little tricks that you're using? Some are built into Visual Studio Code, and some I actually have added functionality through the use of VSCode's extensive extension library. So if you are curious about what I use every day, keep watching. I'll have a link in the bottom to an actual just list of all the extensions if you want to kind of install them yourself. That would probably be a good idea from learning from this video. So let me open up VS Code to kind of walk you through what all these extensions are. Alrighty, let's start talking about some Visual Studio Code extensions. And even to start off things ahead of time, I'm going to talk about the theme that I use with Visual Studio Code. I use this thing called Atom 1 Dark, which is actually a port of a theme that I got very used to, and I used Atom as my editor, if you remember when that was a thing. I used Atom for a long time. I eventually switched over to VS Code when I found myself typing faster than Atom could actually render on the page, and I realized that was kind of a sad place to be in, that my editor could not keep up with my own thoughts, so that's when I switched to VS Code. But I did like the theme of it, so I use this Atom 1 Dark theme, which is the actual colors that you see here when I kind of open up files everywhere. But let's actually talk about the extensions that I use. And for some, I'll give you a little quick demo of like what they do, and some will hopefully be self-explanatory. I'm just going to go to the extensions over here, and then literally just talk about the installed extensions. We're just going to go down the list one by one. So the first one was Atom 1 Dark syntax, which I just talked about, so I'm not gonna do that again. Auto close tag. This is a nice little extension just to help with some niceties. I feel like sometimes it doesn't work. Like if I make a language mode of HTML, I guess it works. So that's what it does. So when I do the right angle bracket, it automatically completes that. It gets confused sometimes with React and also React and TypeScript. It's kind of hard to manage all those things, but I'm just doing HTML. It makes me be faster. Bazel. This is for support for Bazel, which is a build system for mostly backend applications, and actually Angular uses Bazel too, which is wild. It makes sense because Bazel is built by Google, and Google makes Angular, so putting those things together makes sense, but a little heavy-handed for a front-end application. Beautify. This is a thing that before Prettier was around, and actually, I think I probably don't need this anymore, but I'd rather have it than not. Essentially, if I have some file that's really gross, I can beautify it. Like if do I have an example of this? No, these are all going to be prettier, so I'm not going to worry about that. TOML support. TOML is like YAML, like JSON, just a way to create configuration for your application. This adds syntax support for that. I've messed around with TOML in the past, but it's installed, so whenever I do mess around with TOML again, it's there. Change case. This is a nice one. Literally, if I want to change the case of something, if I have like some mass refactor that I'm doing, it makes it pretty easy to do that. So you can see the example there. If I do language mode JavaScript React, I do counts foo equals banana, and now if I do make the size bigger, if I do change case, I'll do this to lower. I already did that. Change case to snake. And I'm doing all the worst examples. We'll do, is there an upper? Upper, look at that, great. Code spell checker. This is a built-in spell checker for VS Code, which kind of helps sometimes to catch some spelling errors when I'm going around. Color picker, some of these things you never actually see me use, but this is kind of like the full range of everything that I have. Lets me actually pick color from within VS Code. Debugger for Chrome. Supposedly this lets you debug if you have a website that you're working on and you have a debugger statement in Chrome, you can actually use VS Code as the IDE for debugging it. I never actually use this, but it's installed in case there's one day that I want to. Java support, because I do some Java at work. This is the one that I actually love. It's from the days of Sublime Text and Atom. I can go here and do / ... enter, and it automatically gets things prepared for me to document this. JS.comment. Looks like it also does some defaults for me, which is nice. Support for editor config. If you work on shared code, you can have a .editor config file that will change how your editor handles files. So this now adds support for VS Code for that. ESLint support built in, so actually you can see highlighting of warnings and errors in my files. Hopefully you already have this installed. This is one of the biggest ones that I rely on daily. I mean, it just makes my life so much easier where if I have some file and I don't even know how to show an example. So one here, no, I can't find an example right now, but lovely. This is a very cool one, which I used in the past and then forgot about and then used again. Essentially, this lets you actually have an entire IDE, lets you use VS Code for managing all your pull requests. It's really, really cool. You can literally check out the code locally in an automated way. I don't have to worry about figuring out what the pull request branch is, checking it out, then running all the stuff locally. This manages it all for me. You can even add comments to the pull request in VS Code that'll get synced to GitHub. It's actually a very awesome extension. Has a lot of functionality built in. There's definitely a learning curve, but if you do a lot of pull request reviews and you like seeing them in your own editor, this will make that experience a whole lot better. Gitignore, language support for Gitignore files, so that VS Code understands them. This is also one that some people swear by this extension. I kind of take it or leave it. This has just, I mean, it's what it says here. It's supercharge the Git capabilities built into Visual Studio Code. I mean, it has so much Git related integrations that lets you kind of like, for example, here they're showing you can barely see it, but inline blame messages of who last wrote that line of code. There's a whole bunch of other things that it does. It's very, very powerful. I use probably just like 5% of it. GraphQL syntax highlighting for VS Code. IntelliSense for class names, so it'll actually crawl your entire project and find class names that you use to give auto suggestions for those class names. More Java things, Java things. Code snippets, I don't even know which one of these I use, honestly. I think the biggest snippet that I ever use is like CLG for console log, and I use sometimes for like if statements. I like use that to just autocomplete some things here and there just to save myself a few keystrokes. What is this? Language support for Java. This one's really cool. I've never actually, if you're in a remote environment or you want to help remote debug with somebody, this thing is, I mean, I played with it just to play with it, but never actually used it for real. But essentially, have you used Google Docs or some live editing experience where you can actually work on the same thing at the same time? That's kind of this for VS Code, where you can actually share your VS Code editor session and all the files with somebody else remotely and actually collaborate on the same files. It's really, really, really cool. If I was remote working, I'd probably use this a whole lot more. Support, so I guess these are themes for Markdown. More Java, syntax highlighting for MDX. MDX is Markdown X. Essentially, if you want to use React components inside of a Markdown file. I've talked about MDX in the past, I've hoped. Maybe I've talked about MDX deck, but not MDX itself. MDX is very, very cool. Mocha snippets, so helps me be able to just do this. I never actually used these before. I probably should uninstall it, but it's still there. This was one that was brought over from Sublime Text that Atom has as well, and I use this all the time. If I have, let's say I have a whole line of numbers, 3, 4, and let's say I want to like actually make these variables. If I want to do that manually, I have to do like const1 equals 1, right? And that sucks, and that's a lot of manual work, and I hate doing manual work, so I like to do things automated. So what this extension lets me do is actually select all those lines, trigger the extension, which is I think Option Shift L. So now you see I have these multi-select cursors everywhere on each line. So now I can kind of just use some keyboard magic to select all of them, copy the actual text, right, const, go to the end, and then wrap those around in a string, and I've just made now 4 variables, duplicating my keyboard strokes the same way. Really, really awesome. Use it all the time. It makes me very much feel like a pro user when I do that because it's really cool looking. But you kind of have to think about when and where you want to use that, because if you don't think about using it, you just never will. And I heavily rely on this for JSON files and all these mass editing of the same monotonous things. This saves me so many keystrokes. No debug. I don't know why it's here twice. Probably a bug in my VS Code. NPM support for VS Code, so it will help me run. It'll show me commands running scripts that are available in the NPM category. IntelliSense to helpfully suggest packages that I can install in NPM projects. Another theme, which maybe that's the one that I was talking about instead, the actual theme, whatever. This was a cool one, open in GitHub. I find it very useful, so I can go to some file, do Command-Shift-P, and I type in GitHub. I say open in GitHub the file, say that's the branch, and then right here, then I can send somebody a link to that file, nice and easy. Use that extension a lot. Paste and indent. I don't know if I use this, to be honest. Path IntelliSense, again, this is to autocomplete file names, so if I'm doing some path, it'll help me complete that. Support for Prettier. I use Prettier all the time. Prettier is definitely one of my favorite tools to come out in a long while. This adds that support built in to automatically format my code as I'm writing it. This one you'll see me using all the time. It's almost done by default. Essentially, when I save a file, Prettier will automatically format it for me, meaning I don't have to worry about formatting at all. If I do Prettier, if I just do format, document, there we go. Prettify JSON, if there's ugly JSON, it'll help you just make it look more manageable. Project Manager, this is nice if you have multiple VS Code projects that you're working on. You can kind of make a whole, for example, I have these that I can easily switch between them to load up that file and not worry about whether they're on the file system. So I use that every day. Python support, React Native support, ReasonML support. When I was playing around with that, not so much anymore. This one is also a core extension, Settings Sync. I don't know why it's not built into VS Code, probably because there's more gotchas if they wanted to do this correctly. So this is kind of a hack, but essentially this lets me sync and back up all my VS Code settings, which includes my users.json file for like my themes and my editor configs, all the extensions. It saves all that into a GitHub gist that uses it as kind of the manifest file for what settings I want to have my VS Code set with. This is great, especially if I'm changing things around at home or at work. I can sync those settings and everything just works magically and awesomely. Definitely recommend you use that if you do have multiple VS Code settings installed, or just install it, because it's good to have a backup of everything that you may be using. Svelte language support, SVG support, to actually be able to view a SVG in VS Code. Future, this is support for Vue in VS Code. Visual Studio IntelliCode, this is also trying to make things smarter with the suggestions that VS Code prompts you. VS Code icons is the one that I use. You can see here this is without, and then when it's on, all these nice little icons in here to help me be able to understand what that file's content is. I love this little tweak extension. And last but not least, XML tools, which I don't know what they are. I think it's just support for XML. Yeah. So that's kind of the tour of all the extensions that I use every day in VS Code that makes me a happy VS Code user. I definitely recommend you install at least a few of them if you don't have them already. Prettier for sure, because it makes the experience of writing code so much nicer and prettier. Hopefully that was illuminating to you to see what I use every day. This is the 2019 edition. I'll probably have to update this in the future when things change. They've been pretty stable for the past year or so. I don't really go looking for extensions anymore. I'm pretty happy and content with my setup. I don't really have any pain points that I know about. That's always the thing that I find most interesting, is that all of a sudden you find some extension and you're like, wow, I did not know that I have this issue until I found this extension. So I'm sure that'll happen in the future because there's always ways to make things better. But that's why VS Code makes me laugh, because it's like a text editor, but it's also like an IDE, and like extensions is kind of like what lets you change that barometer of is it more a text editor or is it more of an IDE. So always very cool. Thank you for watching. Love it when you do. Tell your friends, your family, your coworkers, and your pets. I have a large and small growing pet watching fan base. Mostly they just like that my last name is Wolf, and they all know that wolves are the king of the jungle, even though wolves don't live in the jungle. That joke kind of went nowhere. Thank you. I will see you again next week with a brand new episode, and until then, keep coding.